This is the story of a man who walked into a job interview and left with a vendetta. He didn't scream, he didn't beg. He built in silence. While the man who humiliated him laughed, he was building an empire, brick by brutal brick. 5 years later, the tables turned. And when the dust finally settled, the man who once tossed his resume in the trash was the one getting escorted out the door. This isn't just a story of corporate revenge. It's a story about what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. I sat across from him in a cramped office that smelled like fake citrus and stale coffee. My suit was 2 years old, tailored for a body I no longer had, and I could feel the sweat gathering under my collar. His name was Darren McKay, Director of Talent Acquisition at Redcliffe Systems, and from the moment I stepped into the room, I knew I was already losing. He didn't shake my hand, just nodded, barely looking up. His desk was a cluttered mess of open files, energy drinks, and a cracked monitor that flickered at the edges. Behind him, a window offered a perfect view of the city skyline. Everything in that office screamed power, but in a tired, sloppy way, like it had been held too long by someone who stopped caring. He flipped through my resume with the same disinterest you might have for a receipt. His fingers were stained with ink, nails bitten down. Every few seconds, he'd let out this scoffing little sound like he was doing me a favor just by reading it. "You were a shift lead at Evergrove Retail?" he asked, not bothering to hide his smirk. "Yes, for 2 years. I managed a team of, shelf stockers? You know this is a software solutions firm, right?" I kept my voice steady. "I do. I spent the last 3 years working towards my degree in information systems while consulting part-time for 2 mid-sized tech startups. Both improved operational efficiency under my recommendations." He leaned back in his chair and actually laughed. It wasn't even subtle, just a short, sharp bark of disbelief that cut right through me. "I mean, Jesus, you just don't look like leadership material, no offense." I said nothing. My hands were folded, my shoulders still. "You're too soft, too average, not the right fit. And I've been doing this a long time, so believe me, I know when someone's not cut out for the climb." He picked up my resume between 2 fingers and, with exaggerated slowness, tossed it into the trash can beside his desk. While I was still sitting there, something in me curled up and died. I could feel it. Not pride. That had already been bleeding out since the moment I walked in. What died in that moment was a tether, the one that connects you to hope, to humility. It snapped, and what replaced it wasn't rage. It was something colder, sharper. I stood, thanked him for his time, and left without a single word more. Not because I was defeated, but because I already knew what I was going to do. It was going to end him. It started with nights. I took on more contract work. Data architecture, digital transitions, systems analysis. I'd take anything. I coded until my fingers ached and read case studies like they were scripture. I rebuilt myself from the bones up. During the day, I worked full-time at a mid-tier firm called Lenvar. It was dying, slowly, bleeding money in leaks the size of handshakes. The board was too bloated, the software outdated. But they had history, and I knew that with the right pressure, a relic could become a weapon. I stayed at Lenvar for 3 years. I clawed my way from junior analyst to director of strategy by the 2nd year. Not because I smiled or played politics, but because I delivered. When systems failed, I rebuilt them. When clients left, I brought new ones. I didn't charm, I didn't kiss ass, I just got the job done better than anyone else. And in the dark, in the hours no one saw, I studied Redcliffe Systems like a wolf learning the gait of its prey. Darren's company was strong, but lazy. Fat off early success, built around legacy clients and old contracts. Their tech was passable. Their leadership was stagnant. I watched quarterly reports, dug into financial statements, even paid a friend in legal to show me the names of their shareholders. They were vulnerable. They just didn't know it yet. When Redcliffe's stock dipped after a public data breach in their cloud service division, I saw my opening. My firm had been preparing an acquisition portfolio for months. I pushed for Redcliffe, hard. It wasn't personal, on paper. I framed it as strategic. Their assets, their tech infrastructure, their market penetration. But it was personal. My CEO was hesitant. I convinced the board. Bought enough stake quietly to matter, then leveraged a merger that hit Redcliffe like a hammer. Their CEO caved. Money talks. And when the ink dried, Lenvar became the majority holder of Redcliffe Systems. We rebranded. We restructured. And I was named CEO. 5 years, that's how long it took. 5 years of silence, sacrifice, and sharpened knives. I walked into the building Darren once humiliated me in on a Monday morning. It smelled the same. That same fake citrus clinging to everything like rot hiding behind flowers. I took the executive elevator, walked past glass offices and long, bitter stairs. And then I stepped into his office. The same office, same window. But now the name on the door was mine. Darren was sitting in a guest chair, summoned like a servant to the altar he once mocked me at. He didn't recognize me at first. That made it better. I sat across from him, legs crossed, and slid a sealed envelope across the table. He opened it. Read the first line, and I watched the blood drain from his face. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "It's not," I said. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Cause listed in the letter. HR will collect your badge on the way out." He looked up at me, suddenly angry, like a man who'd been robbed. "You're firing me? You? This is—" I slid a second item across the desk. A frame. Inside it was my resume. The same one he tossed in the trash. Signed in red at the bottom. CEO, Lenvar Redcliffe Systems. His mouth opened. Closed. "I told you," I said quietly, "that you were wrong." He stood up too fast. The chair screeched behind him. People were watching through the glass. I let them. "Security will escort you out. I suggest you go quietly." He didn't scream. He didn't argue. He walked, and I watched him disappear down the hall like a man waking up from a dream he thought would never end. But mine had just begun. The silence after he left was thick, heavy like the air before a storm breaks. I sat alone in that office for several minutes, staring out over the city skyline that once stood behind Darren's back, wondering if it felt as sweet as I imagined it would. It didn't. It felt better, but there was more to do. Removing him was just the first incision. I needed to carve out every bit of the rot he left behind. The team he built was a mirror of him. Smug, risk-averse, inflated titles for deflated egos. They weren't innovators, they were guards at the gate, protecting their turf from real talent. I held a meeting that afternoon, mandatory, no exceptions. They gathered in the main conference room, 47 people, some confused, some nervous, a few visibly angry. Darren had cultivated loyalty in the way cult leaders do, not with respect, but with fear and ego-stroking. I stood at the head of the table, no notes, no slideshow, just truth. Effective today, Redcliffe Systems no longer exists as you knew it. We are Lenvar Technologies now. We move fast, we adapt, we produce. If you're here because you want to coast, protect your title, or guard your corner of the sandbox, you won't last. That's not a threat, it's a promise. There were whispers. Then I dropped the real news. A full audit of departmental leadership is underway. Some of you will be offered lateral shifts or demotions. Others will be offered severance. I won't entertain negotiations. You either help build what's next, or you step aside. They hated me for it. I saw it in their eyes. But a handful, the ones who'd been drowned out under Darren, looked up like they were finally being allowed to breathe. That was who I was building for. I worked 14-hour days the first month. Fired 7 department heads, promoted people Darren had never bothered to speak to, engineers, coders, mid-level analysts who had real fire. I sat in the back of dev rooms, listened to frustrated staff talk about what they could do if leadership wasn't in their way. They made their ideas happen. Morale split hard down the middle. The dead wood rotted fast once it was exposed to light. Some left, I let them. But the ones who stayed started to see it, the shift. I kept Darren's framed copy of my resume on the wall behind my desk, not as a trophy but as a scar, a reminder. Every day I saw the words "not leadership material" and used them like fuel. One afternoon, almost 2 months after the firing, I got an email from an old friend from Evergrove. She'd seen the news. My name in a headline, the merger, the promotion. We hadn't spoken in years. She asked if I remembered the time I lent her $40 when her card got declined on lunch break. I replied immediately. Then I paid off her student loans because I remembered what it felt like to have everything stacked against you. Darren didn't reach out, but others did. People who'd once ignored me on LinkedIn, recruiters who rejected my applications with copy-paste rejections. Now they were suddenly excited to connect or curious about opportunities. I didn't respond because none of them saw me when I was building in the dark. One day, late evening, I got a knock at my office door. It was Carson, a mid-level manager from procurement who'd worked under Darren for nearly a decade. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice low, "about Darren and what he did before he left." He handed me a USB drive. It contained emails, dozens of them, forwarded, deleted, buried, internal communications where Darren had blocked minority candidates, ignored whistleblowers, buried internal assessments that exposed gross mismanagement. He'd even rerouted company funds through a shell vendor tied to his brother. It was fraud. I stared at the screen, jaw locked. Not because I was surprised, but because it meant he hadn't just humiliated me. He'd stolen from the company, from the people under him, from the system that once protected him. And now I had the knife to gut him publicly. I contacted legal, quietly, methodically. We built a case, not for a public spectacle, not yet, but to ensure the board could strip his remaining stock, reclaim damages, and notify federal regulators. It would be slow, bureaucratic, but once it started, it wouldn't stop. I sent the documents forward, but I wasn't done, because something in me still wasn't quiet. I booked a speaking engagement, a conference in Seattle. Topic: recognizing hidden talent in the corporate world. It was a move calculated to burn him publicly without ever saying his name. He told the story, a version of it, about the interview, the trash can, the humiliation. I saw the crowd lean in, because every one of them had been passed over once, dismissed, doubted. I made them feel it. And when I ended the speech, I said this: sometimes the gatekeepers forget they didn't build the gate. They just found a chair near it. You don't ask them for permission. You build a bigger gate, and then you make sure they never get near it again. They stood, applauded, and somewhere Darren would see the clip online. And no, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. The conference speech went viral. I didn't expect it to. It was supposed to be a message, not a spotlight. But within days, every business blog, leadership podcast, and startup forum was quoting the same lines. The trash can moment. The chair at the gate. People loved the story of the underdog who came back swinging. They didn't know the name Darren McKay, but they knew what he stood for. And I made sure they never forgot what I stood for either. A week after the conference, I got a message from a journalist. She said her name was Eva Beck. Said she'd been following Redcliffe Systems for years, back when they were promising next-gen cloud solutions and failing to deliver anything but buzzwords. She wanted to talk about the merger, about the turnaround, about the man who went from retail shift lead to CEO. I almost said no, but then she added, I want to talk about what happens when toxic leadership gets held accountable. That word stuck. Accountable. I agreed. We met in my office. She didn't bring a camera crew or a recorder, just a notepad and tired eyes. She asked tough questions. I gave honest answers. She asked about Darren. I didn't say his name. I just said, there was someone who didn't see me. And I decided to build until they couldn't ignore me. She nodded like she understood more than I said. When the article came out, it wasn't flashy. It was precise, detailed. She dug deep, outlined how Lenvar was bleeding before the merger, how Redcliffe had been falling behind, how the new leadership had cut waste, promoted real talent, and turned two failing companies into one rising force. And in the final paragraph, she quoted a line I'd said offhand. Revenge is temporary, but impact, that's what lasts. It landed harder than I expected. 2 days later, I got a subpoena. Darren was being investigated. The fraud, the shell accounts, the misuse of company funds, it all came crashing down. Turns out the shell company had ties not just to his brother, but to a real estate deal in Florida. Tax fraud, corporate embezzlement, wire fraud. He wasn't just a bad leader, he was a criminal. He was arrested at a golf course, wearing a polo shirt with his name stitched on the chest. I didn't smile, but I didn't look away from the TV either. His mugshot was online in hours. I saved it, not to gloat, to remember. People started talking, whispering about how he used to run things, how he'd belittled interns, passed over qualified candidates, created a culture of fear. The stories spilled out like rot from a cracked wall. But I never commented. I didn't need to. His past was burying him faster than I ever could. Then something unexpected happened. I got a letter, handwritten, delivered by courier, no return address. It was from his wife, or ex-wife, I wasn't sure. It was short, 4 sentences. I don't know what he did to you, but I know what he did to us. Thank you for making him finally answer for something. My kids are better off with him out of the picture. I read it twice. Then I burned it. Because some things don't belong in files or memories. Some things are just meant to end. Months passed. The company grew. We secured 3 new contracts, expanded into 2 new markets, and launched an internal development incubator for low-level employees with product ideas. I named it Gatebreakers. Quietly, without a plaque. My days were full, my nights more peaceful than they'd been in years. But part of me still circled the moment. The trash can, the laugh, the way he looked at me like I wasn't real. I went back to that office one evening, the one where it happened. It had been remodeled, repurposed into a shared workspace. Clean glass walls, neutral tones, everything minimalist. But I remembered exactly where I'd sat, where he'd sat. I stood there, alone, for a long time. Then I took out my phone, opened a draft I'd written years ago, an unsent message to him. It said only this: "You made me." I deleted it. He didn't deserve that much credit. Because the truth was, he didn't make me. Every night I stayed up coding when my hands shook from caffeine. Every rejection I turned into a blueprint. Every no I turned into a strategy. I forged myself in silence, not spite. And now the silence was mine. 6 months after Darren's arrest, the Department of Justice made its final move. He pled guilty to 2 counts of corporate fraud and 1 count of wire fraud. He took a plea deal. 5 years federal time, probation after that. No chance of returning to the corporate world. His license to operate in any financial or executive capacity was revoked indefinitely. I read the court summary in silence. No part of it surprised me. I knew men like him didn't think consequences applied to them. I also knew deep down that prison would never truly feel like justice. Not for what he took, not for the people he crushed under the weight of his own mediocrity dressed in power. But it was enough. It was the end of him. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing. I didn't watch the live stream. I had no interest in seeing him walk into a courtroom in handcuffs. That wasn't the victory. The victory had already happened. The day I took the company from him. The day I erased his name from the door. the day I looked him in the eye and handed him my resume in a frame. That was my justice. What mattered now was everything after. And Lenvar was thriving. We weren't a giant, not yet, but we were loud. Our software had been adopted by 3 major logistics chains. We were leading a pilot program with a health tech firm out of Boston. But more than that, people wanted to work for us. We'd become known as a place where talent spoke louder than pedigree. We had one rule pinned in every department. No gatekeepers, only builders. It wasn't a motto, it was law. I mentored rising leaders now, personally. Not just the flashy ones with MBAs and confident voices. I looked for the ones who sat quietly in meetings, taking notes, watching every move. The ones who showed up early, not because they wanted to impress, but because they were hungry to learn. I knew them, because I was them. One of them was a young woman named Mariah. She reminded me of myself more than I liked to admit. Soft-spoken, nervous about titles, but sharp, ruthlessly efficient. I promoted her to strategy director 6 months ahead of schedule. When she asked why, I didn't give her a speech. I just said, "Because I see you." That's all you ever needed. The day after the promotion, she brought me coffee and left a note on my desk. "Thank you for breaking the gate." I kept that note in the same drawer where I'd once kept Darren's framed copy of my resume. That frame? I gave it away to a museum exhibit at the local university titled The Modern Underdog, Stories of Unlikely CEOs. They didn't put my name on it. I just wrote the caption. This resume was once thrown in a trash can. Now it runs an empire. Years passed. The office changed again. New faces, new interns, new technologies. I stayed in the role longer than most said I would, 7 years. I stepped down not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to become what I'd once fought. I hired a gatekeeper. I left the company in the hands of people I trusted, builders, dreamers, survivors, and I started something else. A fund, small at first, designed for entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds, retail workers, immigrants, GED holders, the ones every boardroom passes over. I called it the Quiet Rise Fund. Every application was reviewed manually. No AI filters, no GPA requirements, just people. The first project we funded came from a gas station clerk who built a logistics app during his lunch breaks. His company is now valued at $40 million, 0 cents. I keep his first pitch deck framed in my home office, right above my desk. One night, sitting there alone, I looked through my old folders. There was one file I hadn't opened in years. It was a copy of my original resume, the exact one Darren threw away. They read it again. Not with anger, with awe, because everything in that resume was still true. I had worked retail. I had scraped through school while juggling night shifts and side hustles. I wasn't polished. I wasn't connected. I wasn't impressive on paper. But I had never been average. And no one would ever convince me otherwise again. I closed the file, sat back, and let the quiet settle in around me. Not silence born from being ignored, but the kind that comes after a storm ends. The kind that says, you made it, you survived, you built, and you changed everything. That office where he laughed at me? It's a daycare center now, for employees' kids. We turn it into a place that grows futures instead of crushing them. Because I never wanted to be just a CEO. I wanted to be the reason someone never had to sit in a chair like that and be told they weren't enough. I never said his name again. He didn't deserve the echo. But I never forgot the sound of that laugh. And I never stopped proving it wrong.